This week we are talking about the data point that matters, and that's Donald Trump's huge fundraising so far. His war chest is massive.
This is a dollar amount that is unmatched in the Republican Party, and the dollars matter. President Trump can spend them as he sees fit. But what really matters is where they're coming from. Donald Trump is raising tens of millions of dollars on Facebook, through text, through email solicitations. There's no one who can match that. And you think about 122 million in the scheme of a presidential race. That's like, the opening table stakes for Iowa and New Hampshire. But again, look at the people thinking. They say they're thinking of running for president. People like, Mike Pompeo, people like Ted Cruz. They can raise some money. Governor DeSantis in Florida has raised a lot of money, but not in those small dollar amounts. And as you know, John, as most of the viewers know, small dollar donors are more valuable.
Yeah.
They don't need to be fed. They don't need to be courted in the same way. You just send them some electronic communication. They send the money. Many of them contribute more than once. They have skin in the game. So that 122 million figure is a big number. But you think about all the contributors that led into that, many of them giving small amounts. Those numbers matter a lot. They are the greatest manifestation, I think, of Donald Trump's unparalleled power within the Republican Party. Because again, none of the other 2024 hopefuls can come close to his ability to raise money through digital.
And when you talk to the crowds at these rallies, the intensity of the support is unlike anything I've ever seen before. I mean, it's hard to put it into words. Also hard to imagine any of the other folks you talked about would be able to bring a crowd of that size, 45 minutes outside of downtown Houston or an hour outside of downtown Phoenix. Hard to imagine that scenario. All right. Yeah. The data point that doesn't matter this week is 12, and that's the full list or the short list of names being talked about for the Supreme Court vacancy that's going to be left by Stephen Breyer. Imagine, Mark, because the number is much smaller than 12, right?
It is, in my understanding of what's going on. Look, the president limited the length of the long list by saying it's going to be a black woman. Some of his advisors have said it's going to be a judge. And while there's federal courts and state courts, et cetera, you're looking there at a list. Not all the people in that graphic are judges, but there just aren't a lot of options. And I believe, really, you're talking about Judge Jackson, Judge Childs, maybe Judge Kruger. I would say those three. So the White House wants to add suspense. If it ends up being one of those three, and I think it will, there wouldn't be much suspense. And they know the way this game is played. You need to pretend the long list is longer than the short list, and that there's a long list and a short list and a shorter list. I really do think there's just that short list of those three judges. I'll be surprised if it's someone else. But as I said, in the last day or so, you've seen a lot of news reports talking about a dozen prospects, and they're floating different names of folks. I believe they're doing that to make people feel good, to show that the process is kind of exciting and dramatic, that it's like the real life episode of The Bachelor meets LA Law. But again, I think we're talking about a short list here, and of folks who Joe Biden knows and are being very, very strongly recommended to him.
Well, LA Law, that was the early days of must-see TV a long time ago. Real quickly, going back to some of the potential, somebody else besides Trump who may run in 2024, Ted Cruz still wants to be president, according to some. He wasn't at the rally in Conroe, Texas on Saturday. Mark, anything to make of that?
I noticed he didn't speak. Governor Abbott did. It could have been one of those famous scheduling conflicts.
Yeah.
But I don't want to speculate because I haven't asked anybody. But I do know that Ted Cruz's relationship with President Trump, publicly and privately, is significantly warmer than it was back during the 2016 presidential campaign, when Ted Cruz and John Kasich were the last two standing against Donald Trump. And there was certainly some elbows that I would say sharper than sharp that were thrown by both Senator Cruz and by President Trump at the time. And like I said, I think things between them are substantially warmer. I don't rule out that Ted Cruz would run if President Trump ran again. But for the most part, I think he gets the joke, and he'd be deferential, I think, probably to Donald Trump if Donald Trump decided he wanted another run at it.
All right, I figured I'd ask you because I got a lot of questions from the crowd. Where's Ted Cruz? Why is he here?
Yeah.
Also, folks wondering why Dan Crenshaw was there. But that's a story for a different day. Mark Halperin, great to see you.
Thanks, John. Great to see you.